Well, hello again, and welcome to the Virtual Professor. I'm Dr. Maxine Bryant, and it is my pleasure to use my education, my skills, my knowledge to educate you about the criminal justice system. Let's have conversations about social justice and about contemporary issues that face our nation and, in fact, the world. So, we've already talked about law enforcement and courts, and today we're going to focus our attention on corrections. Now, actually, corrections is one of my favorite topics as it relates to the criminal justice system. Corrections is indeed the third component of the criminal justice system. Now, the United States holds 2 billion people in correctional facilities throughout our country. That's interesting because we only hold about 5% of the world population and over 20% of the world's prisoners. Now, there's an organization called the Pew Study of the States. They put out a report in 2008 that told us that 1 out of every 100 persons is behind bars in the United States. Wow. Now, that number is declining, okay? We are getting better, but that number is way too high. And a lot of it has to do as a direct result of the war on drugs. I'll talk about that in a moment. So let's first clarify some things. There is a difference between jails and prisons. Now, oftentimes you hear those words interchangeably. They're not one and the same. If a person is sentenced to jail, that means they've committed a misdemeanor or a low-level felony, and they're only serving 1 year, up to 1 year, right? 365 days. If they're sentenced to prison, that means they have been convicted of a felony and going to serve time for 1 year or more, like 366 days or more, right? Now, another way a person can end up in jail, and actually the larger part of the jail population, are people who are being held there until their trial. And those are people who, as I said in my last segment, did not make bail or could not make bail. So there's a federal system in terms of corrections, and there's also the state. In the federal system, which is operated by the Bureau of Prisons, we have several levels of prison, if you will. That's high, like maximum security. That would be similar to that. Medium and low. Then we have minimum, which are like your federal camps. Those are low levels. Martha Stewart, I believe, served her time in a low-level camp, if you will, a minimum security. We also have what we call administrative prisons in the federal system. That's Supermax, right? Up in Colorado. That's the prison that is reserved for the worst of the worst of the worst. People spend the majority of their time in individual cells, very little time outside, no time almost at all connecting with other human beings, right? So that's the administrative level. And now you just don't go there any kind of way. You have to have done something rather heinous. Serial killers, mass murderers, someone who has killed a guard in another prison or has been deemed incorrigible in a different prison. That's how you get the Supermax. We also have contract prisons in the federal system, and those are prisons that are privately owned, and they contract with the federal government to actually house prisoners. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Now, on the state system, if you will, of prisons, each state runs their Department of Corrections a little bit differently, but we have maximum prisons, medium, and minimum prisons. Oftentimes, also, states have what's called CCC, Community Correctional Facilities, and those are at the federal level, too. For example, I used to run and operate a community correctional facility in Michigan, and it was run by or operated by the BOP, Bureau of Prisons. Additionally, you have halfway houses that can be state or federal. And let me talk for a moment about private prisons. Private prisons are sold and traded, rather, their stocks on the open market. And so their executive directors, their administrators, top-level administrators, are making money hand over fist. One of them, which used to be Corrections Corporation of America, CCA, is now called Core Civic. In 2017, their revenue was $1.77 billion. That was up from $280 million in 2000, right? Another well-known private prison group is called the GEO Group, and they are the second largest private prison entity in the United States. In 2011, their net income was $1.61 billion. And get this, they donated heavily to President Trump's campaign. Now, private prisons are in the business for money. They charge a fee, and if states or the government doesn't fill so many beds, then they have to pay the private prison, right? So it's like usually 85%. And so now think about it. If I contract with a private prison and I know that if I don't keep my beds filled, I'm going to have to pay them, then it behooves me, benefits me to keep prisoners in those facilities. How do I keep prisoners in those facilities? I arrest people all the time to create more of a pool, if you will, to feed the private prisons. I think we as a country need to rethink the whole private prison concept, right? Another thing I want to remind you of is that 85 to 89% of all prisoners are released at some point. They do not die in prison, usually, right? And so this whole notion of throw away the key, lock them up and throw away the key, we need to rethink that because they're coming home. And the question isn't, are they ready to come home? It's, are we ready to receive them? If we're not ready as a community to receive them, and that's a part of corrections, right? We then contribute to recidivism. I want to make a mention here about the difference between reintegration and recidivism. Reintegration, let me say, and reentry. Reentry is when a Department of Corrections gives a person $75 and says, okay, here's a bus ticket, go home, don't commit any more crime. Reintegration is when the community is involved in making sure that person becomes a fabric of society and we aid them in their success. Another term I want to introduce you to, this is going to prepare you for our next conversation, and that is desistance. Desistance is the ability of a person to stay away from crime after having been convicted of a crime, really doing some life-changing things. I once thought that, and was taught this actually, that desistance is measured from the time that a person is released from prison until the time they recommit a crime. I just recently spent 3 days in a maximum security prison in Philadelphia, and I met lifers there, people who've been sentenced to life. Now, life doesn't mean life. Life usually means 35, 40 years, and then you're paroled out. I met people, a young man who just turned 50 this year. He's been in prison 27 years. He grew up in prison, right? Met another young man who did serve 30 years, another young man who was serving upward of 40 years. So those men that I met, though, changed my life. They changed my way of thinking. They demonstrated desistance from the moment they walked into prison. There's another word I want to introduce you to that has to do with prison, and that's called prisonization. That's the process of getting acclimated to prison life, and it's necessary to some degree for survival behind bars. I believe these men desisted prisonization. They didn't get caught up in prison life. They didn't let prison life overtake them. As a matter of fact, here's an example real quick. In prison, people get an opportunity to work and make a little bit of money, not much. And so with the particular prison that these young men were in, they had an opportunity to take a job that paid like $1 an hour, which in prison terms is a lot of money. Or regular money is like 19 cents an hour. One young man told me he refused to take the $1 an hour job because he didn't want to become comfortable in prison. So he took the lesser paying job because it was in his mind he was getting out. He was not going to make prison his life. That's an illustration of desistance inside the walls, inside prison. That's enough for now. As you can tell, I'm passionate about the topic. I think I want to invite you to subscribe and to become a part of the Virtual Professor community as we continue to unlock mysteries surrounding the criminal justice system, as we continue to have conversations around social justice, and as we continue to take a look at contemporary issues that are affecting people like you and like me. Thank you for watching The Virtual Professor, and I look forward to staying in contact with you.